You settle into the circle of the tower's lower chamber, where the walls rise like a slow breath drawn inward. Curved stone painted in layers of muted moss green and weathered sandstone, worn smooth by decades of quiet touch. The air is still but not cold, held at just the right temperature between warmth and calm, as if it has been waiting for you all evening without knowing your name. Above the floor, a wide ring of window glass floats like a halo, each pane slightly warped from centuries of gentle change, so that when you look up, the sky beyond is gently bent, softened, not distorted. You are above the clouds now, not in them, and they drift below like loose wool spread across a vast sleeping sea. There is no wind here, though you feel it at the edges, the distant whisper of air moving past the tower's outer ring. But inside, only silence, broken by the faintest hum from the copper coil that runs along the baseboard. That sound does not startle or demand attention. It simply exists like a second heartbeat, slow and steady, keeping time with nothing in particular. The room is small enough to be held in your arms if you stretch them wide, no more than 10 paces across, and yet every surface feels full. Shelves stacked with jars of dried moss, rolled strips of paper tied with twine, glass cylinders filled with pale dust that shifts when the light changes just slightly. There are no books here, not real ones, not in any way you'd recognize. Instead, long scrolls hang from hooks like curtains, each inscribed with lines and patterns that seem to shift if you stare too long, though never clearly enough to read. This is your cozy weather tower, a place built for listening rather than speaking, designed not to command the sky, but to rest beneath it. You are a guest here, welcomed without ceremony, asked only to remain quiet and present as the night unfolds. The wizard who lives in this place does not wear robes or chant, though they do sometimes hum under their breath while adjusting instruments that look more like kitchen tools than magic devices. Brass cups with tiny handles, wooden pegs that measure air pressure by how deep they sink into sand, a pair of compasses whose needles point toward the nearest quiet thought instead of magnetic north. You are not here to learn spells or make predictions, only to record what comes through without changing it. This is original imaginative fiction for relaxation and entertainment, not weather advice, medical treatment, or any guarantee of sleep.
The instruments you see have no scientific accuracy beyond their own gentle logic, shaped by the tower's history. Its location, high above a lowland plain, known as the Sighing Flats, where even wind has a sigh when it moves through reeds at dusk.
There are no storms here, not truly. No lightning strikes or sudden gales that break trees in half. The weather of this place is gentle and slow, like someone turning over in their sleep. It does not shout. It only speaks in tones too soft for most to hear, unless they've learned how to listen. The wizard, whom you've met briefly at the door, a woman with silver braids that never quite fall into place, steps quietly into the room now and says nothing more than, "You're here," as if it were both an invitation and an acknowledgement. Her eyes are pale gray, not from age, but from looking too long at distant skies. She places her hands on the edge of a wooden table covered in cloth that smells like sun-warmed linen. On that cloth lies today's weather log, half-finished entries written in a looping cursive you've begun to recognize as belonging only to this place. "You'll help with the evening round," she says, not asking, just stating. "Just keep track of what comes through." She points at the window nearest the table, its glass cool to touch, slightly fogged along one corner where breath has rested. "Rain's been thin tonight, not much to measure, but still worth noting." You look up. The clouds below are a low gray layer, soft-edged and slow-moving, like smoke from an unseen fire far below the earth's skin. They do not block the stars. They let them through in scattered pinpricks, though they never quite shine with full brightness. The wind is barely present at all, only just enough to make the cloth ribbons hanging between the windows tremble once or twice every few minutes. One of those ribbons lies across your lap now, folded neatly into quarters, like a letter left unsealed. You pick it up and begin folding it again, not because you need to, but because doing something small with your hands helps settle the rhythm in your chest. The ribbon is made of thin silk from an old moth species that only spins threads when the air is perfectly still. It shimmers faintly, even in low light, catching what little there is and stretching it into colorless flickers, blue at one edge, gold just before fading back to white. When you unfold it, it settles against your palm like a promise not made. The wizard watches for a moment, then nods toward the glass window, where rain has begun to gather. Not in drops, but in fine lines that crawl down from the top inward, like tears drawn by gravity rather than force. The surface is marked with faint tracings of earlier precipitation, thin vertical scratches etched into the inner pane, not deep enough to cut through, but just visible when you tilt your head a little. You press your finger against one line, older than today's rain, and feel its shape, like tracing a memory. "You can read it," she says simply. "Just follow where the glass remembers. You do as instructed, moving your fingertip along the groove, following its path downward until you reach the bottom edge. It ends at a small mark. Not a number, not a symbol, but a tiny dot made by something sharp, maybe a needle tip, maybe a thorn from the old trees outside. You trace it once more and let go, Faded rain, you say aloud. Light, consistent. The wizard gives no response other than to take up a small cloth bag from beside her chair, one that looks as though it had been stitched together from scraps of weathered sails, and pour out into her palm what appears to be nothing but dust. She sprinkles the powder along one edge of the wooden pointer on the table, where it settles like pollen. The wind's still, she says, so we set the marker at calm. You watch as she lifts the pointer, a carved stick with a shallow cup at its base, and places it gently in the center of the table. It trembles once from an unseen current before settling into place. The cup is empty, but its shape seems to know where air would go if there were any. Good, she says. Now look down. You shift your gaze toward the window below and see what you've missed. Another layer of cloud, rising slowly beneath the first one. Thinner still, curling outward like breath on glass. It does not move fast. It moves with purposeless patience, as if time itself had slowed to match its pace. Low cloud, you say. Yes, stable. You take up a small clay cup from the table and fill it with water drawn from the pitcher beside the kettle. The kettle rests on a low stone hearth that does not burn but glows faintly under a layer of ash, like embers held in memory rather than flame. You place your palm over the top to test its warmth, just above body temperature, and nod. Warm enough, you say. She lifts her hand slightly and points toward the tray beside the table where tomorrow's forecast card sits waiting, blank, except for a line at the very bottom that reads, "We may see, the rest is empty." You know it will stay that way tonight. No one here finishes forecasts in advance, not even the wizard. They are not meant to be complete, only begun. You reach out and place your hand on the card, then slide it slowly into the tray, just far enough so the edge rests against the wooden border, but not fully buried. The act feels like laying something down without closing the door. It is neither done nor undone. You shift your weight slightly in the chair, the wood groaning once beneath you, like a sigh held too long. The faint glow from the hearth licks at the edge of your vision, not bright enough to cast shadows, but warm enough to settle into the hollows behind your eyes. Outside, the cloud layer below has thickened, not with menace, but with quiet accumulation, as if something deep in the sky had decided to take a breath and keep it. It doesn't press upward, it just is. There's no sound from the world beyond the glass, except for the soft whisper of windless air shifting against the outer rim of the tower, like cloth brushing stone after being left out too long. The wizard rises without ceremony, her movements slow but not hesitant. She reaches to the shelf behind you, where a series of small wooden boxes sit stacked in uneven rows, and lifts one down that is slightly darker than the others, its surface worn smooth by years of touch. It's unmarked except for a faint pattern carved into the lid, concentric rings like ripples in still water, but irregular, as if made not with precision but patience. She sets it on the table and opens it. Inside lies a collection of thin strips, no wider than your thumbnail, cut from something that once might have been bark, or perhaps dried reed. They are pale grayish-white, almost translucent in places, each one carefully folded into a loop so fine you could slip a hair through its center without breaking it. You recognize them immediately as the wind ribbons, the ones that record the breath of air, not by how fast it moves, but by what kind of pause it leaves behind. She takes up one of the loops and holds it between her fingers, letting the light catch its edge. Not all winds leave marks, she says, voice low enough to blend with the quiet hum of the tower's stillness. Only the ones that remember how to rest. You watch as she folds it once, left over right, then up again in a soft crease, then lays it flat on the table beside the wooden pointer. The fold is deliberate but not rigid, like pressing down a thought you don't want to forget. You lean forward and take another ribbon from the tray. It's longer than the one she used, its surface faintly marked with tiny vertical lines spaced far apart, like notes in a song, too quiet to sing aloud. You run your thumb along it, feeling how each line is slightly raised, as though pressure had etched them into memory rather than material. The fold you make is different this time, not over and up, but side to side, like closing a book that never needed reading. When you set it down beside the others, she doesn't look at your handiwork. She only says, "Good." And then her eyes drift toward the far window again, where the clouds below are beginning to shift in ways too subtle for words. They don't roll or break apart. They simply rearrange themselves, layer upon layer, like old paper being reassembled by invisible hands. You close your eyes for a moment, not to sleep, not yet, but because it feels right. The warmth of the kettle is still on your palms from when you touched it earlier, and now that warmth spreads inward through your fingers, into your wrists, as though something soft had been poured inside. You open them slowly, blinking once against the faint light. The hearth has dimmed further. Not gone, never that, but its glow has settled lower, like a candle in a room where no one remembers to blow it out. The ash beneath is still, not stirred by any draft from below or above. It's as if even dust had learned how to wait. You pick up the clay cup again, not because you're thirsty, but because holding something solid helps you stay present. You bring it close and peer inside. The water has settled completely now, reflecting nothing except a single smudge of cloud shape from outside, distorted slightly at the bottom, as if seen through old glass. There's no ripple, no motion beyond that slow drift beneath. The kettle remains on its stone hearth, its spout open just enough to allow steam to escape in thin wisps, so faint they vanish before you can name them. It doesn't whistle, it doesn't hiss, it simply breathes. You set the cup back down and notice something new. A small groove has formed along one side of the tray where the forecast card rests, worn smooth by time and touch. Not from fingers, not from tools, but from the edge of the card itself, rubbing against its own border every night. The groove is shallow, barely there, but deep enough to feel with your fingertip if you press hard. The wizard stands again now, slow as a shadow stretching across stone. She walks to the wall behind the chair where something hangs. A thin strip of material that looks like linen, yet moves slightly even though no current touches it. It's not tied to anything. It doesn't sway. But when she reaches up and lets her hand pass through its surface, you feel a shift in air pressure. Not enough to disturb your hair, just enough to make the back of your neck tingle. She pulls down the strip and holds it near the table. It's longer than any ribbon you've seen, nearly 3 feet from end to end. And its color is not white or gray, but something between them, a shade that seems less like fabric and more like the moment just before dawn, when light hasn't yet decided what it will be. She places one edge of it across the table's surface where the wooden pointer lies. It doesn't touch directly. It hovers above by perhaps an inch, then begins to settle slowly downward as if pulled gently by gravity or memory. When it finally comes to rest, it aligns perfectly with the tip of the pointer, as though they had been waiting for each other since before you arrived. You don't speak, neither does she.
The strip is not a measuring tool. It isn't meant to show direction or speed. You realize after watching it settle that it's recording nothing but presence. How long something stays still when no one is looking. How quiet the air can be when time forgets itself. A single thread of light from above, the kind you've only seen once before, like a moonbeam caught in dust, passes through the center of the tower and falls across the strip. It doesn't move. It rests there, steady as breath. You lift your hand toward it, not to touch, not quite, but just to watch how your fingers fall into its shadow. There's no need to name what you're seeing.
No need to say aloud that this is a kind of stillness worth remembering. The tower knows, the glass knows, even the ash under the stone seems to lean in slightly, as if listening. You glance again at the forecast tray. The card has not moved since you placed it there earlier. Its blank space feels less like emptiness and more like an invitation, one that doesn't demand a reply. You consider writing something down, just a word, just a phrase, but then decide against it. To feel it would be to claim what isn't known yet, and claiming is not the work here. Instead, you reach for the small linen cloth she keeps folded beside her chair, the one with tiny holes worn through at the corners from years of use, and place it over the card, just enough so the edge of the fabric rests across the top line, but doesn't cover the writing. It's a quiet gesture, not hiding, not revealing, just tucking. The wizard turns now and walks to the far side of the room, where a single shelf holds nothing but jars. They're all empty except one near the bottom, which contains a small collection of stones, not polished, not arranged by size or color. Each is irregular, jagged at the edges, some flat like riverbeds worn smooth by time. She picks up one, the smallest, and turns it over in her palm, once before placing it on the table beside you. It's cool to the touch, but not cold, more like something that has been waiting for warmth. You feel the stone's weight settle against your palm, not heavy, but present, like a memory you didn't know you had. It isn't smooth, no matter how much you press it into the warmth of your hand. Its edges catch at your skin in quiet ways, not sharp, just aware. There are tiny fissures along one side, so narrow they look like lines drawn by something older than language, something that knew what silence was before there were words to describe it. You don't turn it over again. You let it rest. Outside the tall glass window, the cloud layer below hasn't changed in shape or position since you first noticed it. An even sheet of soft gray, like wool left too long in a drawer and then pulled out only for comfort. It doesn't float upward or drift sideways. It just is. The kind of stillness that makes time feel less like a line and more like a circle, where every moment folds back gently onto itself without breaking. The tower sits above it all, suspended not by magic but by balance, by the quiet agreement between stone and sky, glass and wind, what is known and what isn't. The wizard moves to the hearth now, which holds nothing burning yet, just a bed of fine ash, gray and undisturbed. She reaches into the side pocket of her robe, a gesture so familiar it feels like breathing, and pulls out a small wooden box, not locked, just closed with a notch that fits the finger perfectly when pressed. Inside are 3 long strands of dried moss, each one twisted at the tip, their ends curled inward as if they were never meant to be straight. She places them across the ash bed in a loose triangle. They don't move. The air doesn't stir between them. You watch how light from the lantern on the wall, its flame now low and steady, catches just enough at the edge of one strand to make it seem briefly alive, glowing with a faint greenish hue before settling back into stillness. It's not fire. It isn't even warm where it lies. But for a moment, you feel something like recognition. Not in your mind, but deeper down, as if some part of you that never learned how to remember has just been reminded. The wizard returns to her chair without speaking. She doesn't look at the forecast tray or the cloth draped over its card. Her hands rest on her knees. The only sound is the soft creak of wood under her weight, and the almost imperceptible shift of air as a cloud drifts just slightly beneath the tower's base. So gently, it might not have moved at all. You trace the edge of the stone with your thumb, following one of its cracks until it ends where another begins. There's no pattern to it, no meaning in direction or depth, just presence, like every line you've ever drawn on paper that was never meant to be seen. A thread of sound passes through the tower, so faint it might have been imagined. Not music, not a word. More like the moment between 2 breaths when your chest still feels full, but your lungs are empty. It lingers in the air for 3 heartbeats, then fades into nothingness, as if it had never existed. You think of how often people say that silence has no weight until something breaks it. And yet here, silence is heavy with shape. It isn't absence, it's substance. The kind that fills spaces without claiming them. The stone grows warmer now in your hand. Not hot, not sudden. Just a soft seep of heat from the air around you, as though the tower itself were exhaling slowly through its walls. You don't move it away. Letting go would be an act of separation, and there's no need for that. A single drop falls from the ceiling, a tiny splash on the floor near your foot. It doesn't sound like a drop at all. More like air falling into itself, collapsing inward with a quiet sigh. You don't look up to see where it came from. You've learned not to name every small thing. Some things aren't meant to be spoken. Instead, you shift slightly in the chair and let your legs rest flat on the floor, your feet uncrossed. The fabric of your trousers brushes against the wooden rung beneath. Soft friction, like a secret shared between cloth and wood. You don't adjust it. Let it stay as is. This moment isn't about correction. The moss strands still lie in their triangle, untouched by wind or hand. But now you notice something. Where they meet at the center, there's an almost imperceptible shimmer, like a ripple beneath water that wasn't there before. Not enough to disturb the ash, just enough to make your eyes blink once. Slowly, you breathe out and don't count it. The window above still holds the same cloud layer below, but now you see something new. The way its edge has blurred slightly at the farthest point, where the glass meets the stone frame, not torn or cracked, just softened, as if time had worn down that one corner over centuries of watching without blinking. You wonder whether clouds can grow tired, not in a human way, no longing for rest or relief, but in their own slow rhythm, how they gather not because they must, but because they've always done so, how they release rain, not to save anyone, but simply because it is what they do when the weight of vapor becomes too much to carry. You think about that, not as a metaphor, just as fact, and in doing so, you realize you're no longer observing the sky. You're remembering its language. There's a shelf behind your chair now, something new, though you don't recall it being there before. A row of small glass vessels, each no taller than your hand. They are filled with liquid that isn't water, not quite. It shifts slowly within them, as if stirred by something unseen. One holds a deep indigo so rich it seems to absorb light, rather than reflect it. Another contains a pale silver sheen, like oil on river ice in early spring. The third is clear, but not empty. Inside, tiny particles float upward at irregular intervals, stopping mid-air for seconds before drifting back down. You don't reach for them. You don't want to disturb what they've been doing without your help. But you do lean forward slightly and let the light from the lantern touch their surfaces one by one. The indigo vessel darkens further as if it were pleased. The silver one glows faintly, then settles again. The clear one pulses once, just once, as though acknowledging your attention before returning to stillness. The wizard stands now and walks toward the back wall, where a series of wooden pegs hang in perfect alignment. On each hangs a small bell made of hammered copper, no larger than a thimble. They don't ring when she touches them. She runs her fingers along their sides instead, just brushing, not lifting, and they remain still. One by one, she begins to unhook them and place them gently into the ash bed beside the moss triangle. They make no sound as they fall, no chime, no warning. Just a soft settling of metal against gray dust. She places 7 in total, the last one landing with such care it seems almost like a kiss. When she finishes, she steps back and doesn't look at you. She turns toward the far wall where there's nothing but dark stone and an old ladder leading up into shadow. You don't ask what lies above. You've learned that some places aren't meant for eyes. Instead, your gaze returns to the stone in your hand, the one she placed beside you. It is warmer now than it was minutes ago. Not hot, not even warm enough to make your skin flush, but warm like sunlight on a window pane after noon, when no one's watching and everything feels unclaimed. You press it lightly against your chest, just above the heart, and let its shape imprint itself into you. No need to remember why you're doing this. No reason required. Just the act of letting something rest where it belongs. Outside, a cloud shifts again, but not in motion. It changes color slightly, not dramatically, just enough that the gray becomes softer, like old paper left too long on a windowsill and then discovered years later by someone who doesn't know its history. You feel the warmth of the stone deepen in your palm, as though it has learned to hold heat, like breath held just beneath the surface of still water. It does not pulse, it does not glow. But when you press it again, this time not against your chest, but flat on your thigh, The air above it trembles slightly, not with sound, but with something quieter. A momentary shift in pressure that makes the light from the lantern waver just once, like a shadow stretching after a long silence. You do not move. You do not speak. The stone remains where you left it, and so does the stillness. Beyond the window, the cloud layer has softened further, no longer gray nor white, but something between them, as if time itself had been diluted into haze. It doesn't rise or fall. Instead, it breathes inward, pulling a little closer to the glass without touching it. You notice how its edge is blurred not by motion, but by absence, the kind of softness that comes from being forgotten rather than erased. There are no stars visible, though you know they're there. Not because someone told you, but because your body remembers what the sky should be like when nothing else is present. It's a different kind of knowing, one not built on sight or memory, but on absence. The wizard walks slowly toward the east-facing panel where 4 small brass dials are set into the wall. Each one has a tiny hand that doesn't point north, south, east, or west, but instead marks something else. Humidity level in layers, the weight of stillness, the tilt of air currents when no wind is named. One dial spins slowly backward as you watch it, not from any force, but because it seems to be remembering a direction it once knew and has since unlearned. You don't touch it. The wizard doesn't either. She simply places her hand flat against the glass just above it. A gesture so quiet it might have been accidental. But then, she leaves it there for nearly 2 full minutes before lifting away. The room is colder now, not from outside, but because warmth has moved elsewhere, into the floorboards, into the space between your fingers, into the curve of your spine, where the chair holds you gently. The kettle on the iron stand behind you gives a soft sigh as steam rises and curls upward in slow spirals that never reach the ceiling. You don't look at it. You've already seen how its lid trembles with each breath of heat, how the copper base reflects only shadows now instead of light. A new scent arrives, something faint and green, like moss growing inside an abandoned well during a dry season. It doesn't come from any visible source. It simply appears in your awareness as though the air had been holding it all along, waiting for someone to notice. You wonder if the tower breathes too, not in gasps or sighs, but in small shifts like this. One moment, nothing. The next, a whisper of life that doesn't need to be named. There's a drawer beneath the writing desk, small and fitted with brass runners that don't groan when opened. It is not locked. You open it without being asked. Inside are 4 folded sheets of paper, each tied with twine, dyed the color of damp earth after rain. They aren't labeled, there's no ink on them, but they are slightly heavier than you expect, as if filled with something that doesn't settle. You don't unfold any of them. Instead, you place one hand flat over the top sheet and let it rest there for a long while. The paper warms under your touch, not from heat, not exactly, but from presence, like skin remembering a name after years of silence. You close your eyes then, just briefly, and when you open them again, the drawer is closed as if no one had touched it. The cloud outside has changed shape again, this time not in color or density, but in depth. It no longer looks like something floating above the world. It begins to resemble a landscape in reverse. Mountains that are actually hollows, valleys that rise instead of fall, rivers flowing up into their own sources. You know this isn't real, but you also know it doesn't have to be. There is no rule saying clouds must obey gravity or memory. You shift your weight slightly in the chair and feel something settle inside you, like a stone sinking through layers of mud until it finds its place, not because it was meant to go there, but because nothing else held it long enough to resist. There's another sound now, not from the tower, nor the wind, nor even the kettle. It comes from beneath your feet, a quiet click, not loud, not threatening, just a single note of wood shifting on wood, like a floorboard remembering its own joints. You look down and see that the boards near your left foot have shifted just slightly. They are grain now aligned differently than they were moments ago. You don't correct it. You do not adjust them back into position. They are no longer in motion, but something about their new arrangement feels right, as though you've discovered a path only your body could follow without being told. The lantern near the window dims further, so slowly that if you hadn't been watching, you might have thought it was always that way. The flame shrinks not into darkness, but into softness, a single breath held in glass, no longer needing to be seen. You don't reach for the wick. There's no need. Instead, your gaze drifts to the far wall where the ladder begins its climb into shadow. Not high, just enough that the top is lost before it reaches the ceiling. The wood is old and darkened by time, not from fire or age alone, but because something has passed over it again and again in silence. You've never been told what's above. No one ever asks. And yet, you know, without knowing, that the space up there isn't empty. Not a room, not an archive, but somewhere between both, A place where things that have stopped moving continue to exist simply because they were once noticed. You think of how your own breath has slowed since you arrived here, not from effort or intent, but as if the air itself had adjusted its pace to match yours. You don't know whether this is magic, but then again, it doesn't matter what it's called. It only matters that it stays still and safe and soft. The indigo glass vessel on the shelf pulses once, just a flicker beneath the surface, like something stirring in sleep. The silver one remains unchanged. The clear one does not move at all, but you feel its attention as clearly as if someone had touched your shoulder. Outside, the cloud layer begins to thin, not by dissolving, but by becoming less visible. It doesn't vanish, it simply stops being noticed, as though it were a memory that no longer needs to be held in mind, because it has already done its work. The wizard stands again now and walks to the center of the room where there is nothing on the floor except a circle drawn in ash, about the width of your arms when stretched wide. She doesn't step into it, but she pauses at its edge, as if waiting for something that isn't coming. You don't move either. You stay still and let the silence grow thicker around you, like a thread pulled slowly from a spool until it becomes invisible. There's no need to speak, no command to sit or stand, no ritual required, just presence. And then, as if summoned by nothing but patience, another object appears on the table beside your left hand. A small bowl made of stone that wasn't there before. It is shallow and dark, carved with fine lines that spiral outward from its center, like rings in a tree trunk, though no one could tell how old it was. It contains 3 drops of liquid, no more than that. Each drop is suspended mid-air above the surface, not floating on water or air, but simply hanging there as if the bowl were holding space instead of substance. You do not touch them. You don't even breathe heavily. But when you blink, one of the droplets sways slightly, not in motion, but in response to your awareness, as though it had been waiting for a signal that wasn't given. You do not lean forward, nor do you pull your hand back. The bowl rests where it has come to be, its surface unbroken by hands or breath, and still the 3 drops hang above it like secrets that have decided not to leave their place. They are not water, nor light, nor anything known in names. One is dark as a shadow drawn on wet stone. Another glows faintly, not with warmth but with memory, like sunlight remembered from long before you were born. The third does nothing at all. It holds no color, offers no shape, and yet, when you look at it directly, the edge of your vision blurs slightly, as though something had shifted just beyond focus. The air in the room has become softer than silk. It presses gently on your skin, not with weight, but with presence, like being held without hands. Outside, the clouds have thinned so completely that their edges are no longer visible to sight or thought. They exist now only as a quiet pressure beneath the tower's base, like breath kept low in someone else's chest. The wind has stopped moving through the instruments on the wall, not because it is gone, but because they have chosen not to respond. The glass rain line by the window no longer shows any trace of rainfall. It does not need to. The last drop fell hours ago and was caught, not in a vessel, but in silence. You shift slightly, just enough that your shoulder brushes against the table's edge, and the bowl tilts without sound. Not because anything pushed it, but because the room has leaned with you. A single thread of dust drifts upward from the floorboards near the ash circle, spiraling slowly as if caught in an invisible current no one else could feel. It does not fall back down. It simply continues moving, no direction, no purpose, but with a kind of patience that feels older than time. The wizard stands still at the edge of the ash ring. She is not waiting for you to do anything, nor is she watching your breath or counting heartbeats. Her hands are empty, and her gaze is on nothing in particular. The space between two shelves, where shadow gathers like dust after a long day. You think of how many nights she has stood there without saying a word, standing where no one else would go because the air was too still, because the silence had already been spoken. A sound comes, not from outside, not from above, but from inside the tower's walls. It is soft and low, like the memory of wood settling in cold weather. Not a creak or groan, but a sigh that seems to come from something hollowed out long ago and now simply breathing again. The stone bowl does not tremble, but one of the drops, just one, shivers as if it had heard its name called across a distance too vast for language. You do not look away. You let your eyes rest on the suspended liquid, not trying to understand it, only allowing yourself to be seen by it in return. And somewhere deep within the silence, between heartbeats, you feel something open, not wide, not sudden, but slowly, like a door left slightly ajar after someone has passed through. The lantern that was dimming now does not move at all. Its flame is smaller than before, so small it might be imagined, but it remains steady, unchanged in its softness. It no longer burns with need or purpose. It simply exists as light without demand. The glass around it is cool to the touch, even though nothing has touched it. You wonder if this is how fire feels when it stops fighting. There is a scent now, light and clean and faintly sweet, like petals left overnight in a bowl of water. It does not come from any vessel or object. It seems to rise up through the floorboards, as if the tower itself were exhalating after holding its breath for years. You do not know what flower it is, nor have you ever smelled anything quite like it. But when it reaches your nose, it feels familiar, like a moment from childhood that never had a name. A small drawer opens on its own near the foot of the writing desk, a narrow slit in dark wood that has not been touched in years. Inside lies an old feather, pale and slightly curled at the tip, as if it had fallen from some bird that no longer exists. It is not attached to anything. There are no notes or labels beside it. Just this one thing, resting where nothing else has ever rested before. You do not reach for it, but when you blink, its tip moves, just a fraction, as though someone had just brushed past it in passing thought. The cloud layer below has become almost imperceptible now, not gone, but unremembered, like rain that falls so quietly no one hears the splash. The air around the tower does not shift. It simply stays at rest, as if the world outside had decided to stop measuring time and instead begin remembering it. You feel your own body settle deeper into stillness, not because you are tired, but because the room has accepted you without asking permission. Your hands lie flat on your lap, not folded, not clenched, just resting. The warmth from the kettle that was once near the table has long since left its place, but the memory of it remains in the air, like a handprint on glass. A single thread of sound emerges, not from any instrument or device, but from within the space between two wall panels where light does not go and shadows do not linger. It is barely there, a quiet hum that lasts for 3 seconds and then stops as if it never existed. The moment after, you realize it was not a sound at all, but an absence of silence. The stone bowl has changed slightly, not in shape or color, but in its depth, where before it held 3 drops suspended in air, now they are lower, closer to the surface, though still unbroken by gravity. One is nearly touching the rim of the bowl's edge, the others follow slowly, like travelers moving toward a destination not yet named. You do not wonder why, you only watch, and as you watch, something else begins, not in sight, but in feeling. The sensation that you are being looked at, not with eyes, but with attention, not from someone or something, but from the tower itself, from the way the wood leans inward under its own weight, from how the ash circle holds no footprints but still remembers footsteps, from the quiet around the lantern where light has learned to stay. You close your eyes for a moment, not because you are tired, not because sleep is near, but simply because there is nowhere else to look and nothing more to see. And in that dark, something unfolds slowly. The sense of being known without explanation, accepted without condition, welcomed without ceremony. But because it has decided quietly and finally not to stay folded anymore, it is waking up in its own way, not with sound or sudden motion, but with a soft unfolding, like a page opening after years of being closed. There is no reason for this, no cause, only the slow, inevitable turn of things that have waited too long to be noticed. You do not reach out. You don't need to. The ribbon drifts upward on its own, just an inch at first, then another. It floats just above the shelf, like a memory deciding it wants to remember itself. Its fabric is pale gray, worn thin in places where fingers once ran over it during storms that no longer exist. The wizard does not move. She remains near the ash circle, still outside of it, but now seemingly closer than before, not by distance, but by presence. You feel her there without seeing her, like a shape you know is standing beside you even when your eyes are shut. There is another scent now, damp earth and old paper, faintly sweet with moss. It comes from nowhere in particular and everywhere at once. It smells like a library buried beneath roots, or a room left untouched Since someone forgot to close the window, you feel the shift not in sound but in weight, like a breath held too long finally released into the air between two walls that have known each other for centuries. The ribbon floats just above the shelf, still pale gray, still thin, as if it has been waiting to remember how to move without being told. It does not rise higher now, nor does it fall. It simply exists in its own small moment of decision, suspended between what was and what might be. Outside the windows, the clouds below are no longer just a layer. They have become something more like skin, stretched taut across the world's curve, but soft enough to breathe through. They do not roll or rush. They drift with a quiet dignity, as though they know their time is not measured in minutes or hours, but in slow turns of things that were never meant to be hurried. The ash circle remains unchanged at its center, the same ring of dark earth where no foot has stepped since the last storm passed through 7 years ago. But tonight, it holds something new, a single droplet still suspended above its surface like a tear caught mid-fall from an invisible eye. It does not fall, it does not tremble. It simply hangs, catching light in a way that makes you wonder if it is made of glass or memory. The air around it feels heavier, not with pressure, but with patience. You do not turn your head to look at the window again. You know what lies beyond. Low clouds, still and unbroken, like blankets left out after rain. They cover the land below as though someone had laid them down gently by hand, just so no one would feel cold in their sleep. The towers of other weather keepers are not visible. None have been for years. Not since the last time a wind ribbon was folded with such care. And only 2 people remained who remembered how to read its quiet language. A soft sound comes from the far side of the room, the kind that does not belong to any object you can name. It is neither creak nor hum, but something between them, a release, like when wood remembers its shape after being bent too long. The wooden pointer on the table has shifted slightly since last time. It was set to calm just before the kettle went quiet. Now, it points almost straight down, not because of wind or vibration, but as if gravity itself had decided to lean toward stillness instead of motion.
The stone bowl is no longer holding 3 drops. It holds only 2 now. The third has dissolved into air without a ripple, like something that was never meant to stay. The remaining ones are closer together than before, nearly touching each other across the space between them, as though they have begun to recognize one another after a long silence. You do not wonder what this means. You know only that it is happening. The lantern near the shelf dims further, not from fuel running low or flame fading, but because light has learned to be gentle When there is no need for proof, it does not go out.
It simply grows quieter in its presence, like someone who speaks softly so as not to disturb a dream already underway. The shadow it casts stretches across the wall and folds into itself, not in any pattern you can name, but with a quiet kind of logic that feels older than maps. You are no longer watching the room. You are becoming part of it, less an observer and more like a thread woven into its fabric, not seen, not needed to do anything, just there.
The warmth has left your hands long ago, but something else takes its place. Not heat, but a sense of being held by stillness. It is not the kind that comes from comfort or safety, but from belonging without demand. The cloth wind ribbon, still floating above the shelf, begins to move again. Slowly this time, not upward, but sideways, like a page turning in an old book nobody reads anymore. It does not unfold further. It simply shifts its position by inches, as if testing how much room it has before the next decision must be made. There is no wind, no current.
You notice now that the window panes are no longer transparent in the way you first thought. They do not let light through cleanly, but rather filter it as if they had been touched by something softer than glass. Light comes in fractured and blurred at the edges, like memories seen through water. You can still see the clouds below, still see their shape and movement, but not clearly, as though your eyes have begun to dream while awake. There is no clock in this room, no pendulum or ticking mechanism. Time does not pass here. It flows like breath between lips, without beginning or end. The only sign of passage comes from what the instruments do not say. The way the ash circle now holds 3 small indentations where no object has rested for years, as though something had touched it and left behind its shape. The blank forecast card sits in the tray near the table, untouched since last hour, still white, still empty. But even that emptiness is changing, not from dust or smudge, but from a slow softening at the edges, like paper remembering how to curl when no one holds it anymore. It does not crumble. It does not bend. It simply becomes softer in its silence. A faint scent returns, damp earth and old paper, but now mixed with something else. Beeswax, lightly burned from a candle that has long since gone out. You do not recall lighting it, but the air holds the trace of it anyway, like a ghost with no name or form. The wooden pointer on the table shifts again, just enough to make you look. It is now pointing diagonally toward the far wall, where shadows gather thick and quiet, as though waiting for something that will not arrive. The wind ribbon drifts slightly in response, not toward it, but away from the direction of the pointer's new angle, as if it too senses a change not yet spoken. You do not move to adjust anything. You do not speak. There is no need. Something has begun, quietly, without fanfare, that does not require you to understand or name it. The tower listens now, not with ears, but with the way walls settle into their own weight, with how floorboards remember every footstep that ever passed over them, even when no one was there. Outside the window, a single cloud begins to thin near its edge, just slightly, as if someone had reached through and pulled back a curtain. It does not split. It does not vanish. It simply becomes less solid, like ink fading in water. The space beneath it grows darker, not with nightfall, but with depth, as though the world below has opened just enough to let something else pass through. The ash circle shivers just once and then settles again. No one is standing near it. No hand has touched it, but its surface now bears a faint mark, a line so thin you would miss it if not looking for it. A single trace, like the ghost of a finger's trail across wet stone. You feel no need to speak. You do not wonder what this means. You know only that the room is alive in a way that does not ask permission. It has known you since before you arrived. It has been waiting not for your arrival, but for your quiet, your willingness to stop trying to understand and simply be. The stone bowl has changed again, not its shape nor its size, but inside it, the 2 drops are no longer separate. They have merged into one, trembling at the center of the bowl, like a heart that refuses to beat in rhythm with anything else. There is no sound from the lantern now, not even the soft hum of fading light. It has become